The morning she hit me was the morning my father stirred his coffee and asked if I'd be late for work. I had said I missed my mother. My stepmother smiled, then raised her hand. By noon. I'd scheduled a mandatory wellness town hall at headquarters and booked 3 cameras. They thought I was just an employee there to take notes on the proceedings. I was there to end a dynasty. My name is Ava Drake. I am 32 years old. The clock on the microwave read 7:12 a.m. in the sterile, white-on-white kitchen of our Norcrest suburban home. The only sound was the sharp, rhythmic scrape of a metal spoon against the inside of a ceramic mug. Tink, scrape, tink. My father, Thomas Drake, CEO of Cedarline Foods, was stirring his coffee. He stirred it clockwise, always clockwise, 8 rotations. I stood by the granite island, the cold stone pressing through the thin silk of my blouse. The silence in this house was heavy, a physical weight we all carried. It had been building for years, but today it felt suffocating. I hadn't slept. I had been looking at old photographs. I exhaled, and the words came out on that breath, barely audible, not intended for anyone but myself. I miss Mom. The scraping stopped. The silence that rushed in was absolute. Celia Drake, my stepmother, and chief people officer of Cedarline Foods, was leaning against the counter, a green health smoothie in her hand. She hadn't looked at me, now she did. Her eyes, the color of diluted steel, traveled from my face, down to my shoes, and back up. A faint, almost pleasant smile touched her lips. She set her smoothie down. She crossed the 3 feet of Italian tile between us. Her movements were economical, precise. She raised her right hand. The slap wasn't like in the movies. There was no dramatic crack. It was a flat, wet, heavy thwack of palm and heavy rings connecting with the bone and skin of my cheek. My head snapped to the side, my hair whipping across my face. A sharp, distinct pain lanced from my cheekbones straight into my skull, and the taste of salt and copper flooded my mouth. She leaned in, close enough that I could smell the expensive, sharp citrus of her perfume. "Grow up," she whispered. The words were colder than the slap. I turned my head back slowly. I did not raise my hand. I did not cry. I did not speak. I held her gaze. The heat was rising in my cheek, a painful, throbbing pulse that matched my heartbeat. I watched her, cataloging the data, the slight flare of her nostrils, the utter lack of remorse in her eyes. This was not an act of passion, it was an act of correction. The tink-tink scrape of the spoon resumed. I looked past Celia. My father, Thomas, hadn't moved. He was looking down into his mug, swirling the dark liquid. He raised the cup, took a long, slow sip, and swallowed. He looked at his watch, a Patek Philippe that glinted under the harsh LED recessed lighting. "We're late," he said, his voice flat. He was addressing the room, not me, not her. He was addressing the schedule. "Traffic on the 95 will be heavy." He didn't look at my face. He didn't acknowledge the whisper. He didn't acknowledge the sound of the impact. He took another sip of his coffee. That was the moment, not the slap, the tink, the sip, the absolute, profound indifference, the complicity that was as solid and cold as the granite beneath my hands. I turned without a word. I walked out of the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the polished oak of the hallway. I went to the downstairs guest bathroom, the one with the good lighting. I locked the door. I pulled out my phone. I opened the camera, switched it to the front-facing lens. The fluorescent lights of the vanity were unforgiving. It was already blooming, a vivid, angry red flush across my left cheekbone, with the faintest white outline of her fingers beginning to swell. Where her rings had connected, just below the bone, a tiny, precise cut was welling with a single drop of blood. I tilted my head. I took the first picture. Angle, light, timestamp, 7:14 a.m. I took a second. Closer. I took a third. Capturing the small laceration, I opened my secure email client, the one not on the Cedarline servers, and sent the 3 images to an address I kept for this purpose. Subject: D. 004. The fourth time she had put her hands on me, the last time. I blotted the blood with a tissue. The sting was sharp, clarifying. I drove my own car to the Cedarline Foods global headquarters. I watched their black Mercedes sedan pull ahead. My father at the wheel. Celia in the passenger seat, already on her phone, already performing her role as the executive who cared. My office is on the 28th floor. Ethics and compliance. It's a small, quiet office, away from the main bustle. They gave it to me because they thought I was harmless. Their quiet, obedient daughter, trained in forensic accounting, but useful only for internal memos on data retention policies. They thought I was their compliance officer. They forgot my position, by charter. Reports directly to the audit committee of the board of directors. I sat down. I booted my terminal. The throbbing in my cheek had subsided to a dull, heavy ache. I opened a new company-wide email. To All Employees Global, CC, Harrison, Robert. Chair, Audit Committee, Morales. Jenna. External Counsel, Wilmer Hale. Subject, Mandatory Town Hall. An open dialogue on employee well-being. I typed the corporate jargon fluidly. In our ongoing commitment to transparency and our people-first culture, I outlined a mandatory all-hands meeting for 4 p.m. I kept the agenda vague. To address recent feedback and outline new initiatives for a supportive and safe work environment. Celia and my father would see the email. They would see the CC to the board's committee chair and our external counsel. They would interpret it as me being a good, diligent employee, creating a paper trail to show the company was proactively addressing a non-existent feedback issue. They would see it as CYA, covering your ass. They wouldn't see it as the formal notification of an impending execution. They wouldn't understand that the CC wasn't a notification. It was an invitation. It was the legal trigger. I hit send. Then I opened the resource manager. I booked the 34th floor glass conference room. The Apex room. It's a stage, built for impressing investors, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. It's where my father announces quarterly earnings. Next, I opened a high-priority ticket with the AV department. Urgent request for 4 p.m. Town Hall. Apex room. Require full broadcast setup. 3 cameras. 1 static wide on the podium. 1 tight follow cam on speakers. 1 fixed on the audience Q&A mic. Require primary audio feed to house PA. Critical. Also require 3 isolated ISO audio feeds. 1 from each podium mic and 1 from the audience mic. To be recorded separately and delivered to compliant secure server. For transcription and record-keeping purposes. Celia loves a spotlight. I was giving her 3. The hours passed. 9 o'clock a.m., 11:30 a.m., 2 o'clock p.m. I did my job. I reviewed travel and expense reports from the sales team. I redlined a supplier contract, flagging a conflict of interest clause that was too weak. I felt the pressure building in my head, but my hands were steady on the keyboard. At 3:45 p.m., I went to the executive washroom. The light was softer here, warmer, designed to make executives look healthy and confident. I looked in the mirror. The red had deepened to a mottled purple-blue. The cut was a thin, dark line. I opened my handbag. I took out a small, sterile gauze pad from the first aid kit I keep in my desk drawer. I also took out a tube of high-coverage concealer. I debated. Hiding it would be seen as shame. Hiding it would be weak. But I wasn't there to show them my wound. I was there to show them theirs. I meticulously applied the concealer, wincing as the applicator touched the tender skin. I covered the bruise until it was a faint, yellowish shadow. I left the cut bare. A single, unexplainable flaw. I practiced my voice. We'll discuss policy. I said it to my reflection. My voice was monotone, flat. The data indicates a need for procedural review. My eyes were cold. There was no Ava Drake in them, only the forensic accountant. At 3:57 p.m., I stood outside the glass doors of the Apex room. The room was filling. I could see the department heads, the VPs, the assistants. Then they arrived. Thomas and Celia, walking side by side, the power couple. Celia saw me. Her eyes immediately went to my cheek. She saw the concealer, the faint trace of the injury I had tried to hide. A small, satisfied smile quirked the corner of her mouth. She thought she had won. She thought I was hiding in fear. "Ava," my father said, nodding curtly. He was in CEO mode. "Let's get this started." "Of course," I said. They walked past me and through the double glass doors. I watched them enter the room. The stage. The doors began to slide shut behind them, hissing softly. In that last second, before the glass sealed, I looked at my watch. 3:58 p.m. The AV tech gave me a thumbs up from the back of the room. The red recording lights on all 3 cameras were illuminated. The isolated audio feeds were live. The audit committee chair was patched in via secure video link, his face on a private monitor at the tech table. The glass doors sealed with a final definitive click. They were inside. I was outside. I took one slow breath. I began the countdown in my head. 10, 9, 8. I pushed the door open and walked in to start the meeting. I walked to the podium. The apex room was silent, the thick acoustic carpet swallowing the sound of my footsteps. The air was cool, recycled, tasting faintly of ozone and industrial cleaner. On the massive screen behind the podium, the Cedarline Foods logo glowed, a stylized stalk of wheat bending into a gentle, protective curve. Below it, our motto, "Nourish with care." Celia was already at the lectern to my left, adjusting the microphone, smiling at the front row. It was a practiced, warm smile, the one she used for her LinkedIn profile pictures, the one where she was often photographed hugging a factory worker or listening intently, her hand on a junior employee's arm. That smile, and the relentless repetition of phrases like "people first" and "our corporate family," was how she had ascended to Chief People Officer. She didn't just manage human resources, she performed human compassion. To my right, my father, Thomas Drake, stood with his hands lightly resting on his own lectern. He was the face of the company, the one who graced the cover of Modern Enterprise Quarterly under headlines like "Drake's Dynasty: How Cedarline Fed America." His smile was different. It was harder, a precisely engineered piece of corporate resin, designed to convey stability and unwavering confidence. It never, ever reached his eyes. Today, it was firmly in place. They looked at me, waiting, the CEO and the CPO, the perfect executive couple, and me, Ava Drake, ethics and compliance. I placed my tablet on the podium and tapped the microphone. The soft thump echoed through the room. "Good afternoon," I said. My voice was steady, amplified. "Thank you for attending." They thought I was there as their proxy, their internal legal safeguard. When I first joined Cedarline 3 years ago, my father had wanted to place me in marketing, a visible role, he'd called it, something forward-facing. I'd refused. I had insisted on ethics and compliance. It was seen as a back-office function, a cost center, a place of paper-pushing and mandatory online training modules. They'd found it odd, my insistence on a role so dry, but I had one condition for taking the job, a condition I'd framed as a matter of best practices. My reporting line: I would not report to the CEO's office, I would not report to the chief legal officer. My charter, which they both signed without much thought, stated that my position reported directly, and only, to the audit committee of the board of directors. A quiet, strange little position for the CEO's daughter. They'd indulged me. They thought I was the good daughter. They had paid for my education. They saw the art history minor I'd finished to please my mother. Years ago, they conveniently forgot, or perhaps never truly registered. The major I'd pursued for myself after she was gone. Forensic accounting. They saw me as the quiet girl who sat at the dinner table, who didn't cause drama, who was compliant. They had no idea that compliance was a weapon. They didn't understand that forensic accounting isn't about numbers. It's about finding the story hidden in the data, the lie buried in the ledger. After my mother died, The house in Norcrest changed. The warm, slightly chaotic energy vanished. The old photos, me on a swing, my mother laughing in the garden, her hand in my father's, were slowly archived. Celia, with her clean lines and minimalist aesthetic, redecorated. The walls were now hung with large, professionally shot, black and white portraits of the new family. Thomas, Celia, and me at the Met Gala, our smiles perfectly aligned. Thomas and Celia on a sailboat, the very picture of executive vitality. Me, standing slightly behind them, a perfect, neutral accessory, a family built for an annual report. That perfect family was on display every night at the dinner table. Just last month, we'd had a small dinner for a few junior executives. Celia was in her element. She spoke at length about the new anti-harassment initiative she was championing. "It's not enough to just react," she'd said, her voice filled with earnest passion as she swirled a glass of Pinot Noir. "We have to create a culture of proactive prevention, a space where everyone feels psychologically safe to speak their truth." She'd looked around the table, making eye contact with each guest. "At Cedarline, we have zero tolerance for any behavior that diminishes one of our team. Zero." My father nodded, his expression one of deep, supportive pride. "Celia has done extraordinary work on the culture front." I looked at him, at his hand resting on the white tablecloth, the heavy, familiar gold signet ring with the Drake family crest, the one my mother had given him on their 10th anniversary, the one he had never taken off. It was gone. In its place was a sleek, cold platinum band that matched the one on Celia's left hand, the last physical trace of my mother, erased from his person. He had been rebranded along with the rest of the company. I just stared at that empty space on his finger while Celia continued to talk about protecting victims. That was the disconnect. It was absolute. In the sterile, fluorescent-lit world of the Cedarline headquarters, Celia Drake was the architect of policies that protected the vulnerable. She signed memos on whistleblower protections. She approved the budgets for anonymous HR hotlines. She was the guardian of the corporate soul. At home, in the quiet, sun-drenched kitchen at 7:12 a.m., she used her own hands to enforce her own brand of compliance. She was the one who whispered, "Grow up," after an act of violence. She was the danger the policies were written to prevent. I looked up from my tablet, across the sea of faces, employees from accounting, marketing, supply chain. They were all here. They were all watching. I looked at the 3 glowing red lights on the broadcast cameras. One on me, one on them, one on the audience. I understood it with perfect, cold clarity. You cannot use the system to fight the people who are the system. You cannot file an HR report against the chief of HR. You cannot appeal to the CEO who sips his coffee while you are being assaulted. No. If you want to bring down an empire built on a public image, you cannot do it in the dark. You must do it in the light. You must use their own stage, their own cameras, their own audience. You must use the very tools of their hypocrisy against them. Celia was smiling at me now, a small, encouraging, go on gesture. She thought this was her meeting. She thought I was setting the stage for her to speak. She was right. I took a breath, letting the manufactured air fill my lungs. I looked at the AV technician in the back of the room. He nodded. The feeds were live. The isolated recordings were active. "Thank you. Celia, Thomas," I said, my voice cutting through the silence. "As you all know, we called this meeting to discuss employee well-being." I clicked the first slide on my presentation. The logo faded. The screen went blank. "Let's begin." The hunt began long before this morning's slap. The slap was merely the event that set the timeline. For the past 18 months, I have been living a double life, by day. I was the quiet daughter, the diligent employee. By night, I was a hunter. Moving silently through the digital arteries of Cedarline Foods, my weapon was not a gun, but the company's own data retention policy. My camouflage was their profound, arrogant carelessness. It started with the small things, the personal transgressions. After each instance of Celia's correction, a shove in the hallway excused as a stumble, a viciously tight grip on my arm during a family photo, a playful pinch that left a deep purple mark. I documented. I created a private, encrypted log. Each entry contained the date, the exact time from my phone's clock, the location within the house, and a dispassionate description of the event. I would then go to the same spot, place a small metric ruler next to the resulting bruise or abrasion, and photograph it under consistent lighting. The metadata of each photo file was preserved. It was a cold, clinical dataset of domestic abuse, file D001, D002, D003. This morning was D004. But personal injury was never going to be enough. In a court of law, it would be my word against hers, the word of a daughter against a powerful stepmother. I knew I needed more. I needed to prove a pattern, not of personal cruelty, but of systemic corruption that she directed. To do that, I turned to the place they thought was safest, their own digital history. They had forgotten that as a compliance officer, I had administrator-level access to the company's e-discovery and litigation hold platform. It's a system designed for lawyers to find documents for lawsuits. It creates a complete, unalterable backup of every email, every instant message, every document created on the Cedarline network. Deleting an email from your inbox doesn't delete it from the archive. I started with a simple keyword search: Cobalt Ridge. Cobalt Ridge is our largest processing plant, a sprawling facility 3 hours upstate. It's also been a quiet source of trouble. I'd heard whispers. I started digging. I found the emails, dozens of them, from floor supervisors to HR business partners. They were all forwarded to Celia's chief of staff. And then, nothing. The email chains just died. But in the archives, I found the originals. Complaints about managers altering time cards. Reports of workers being pressured to work off the clock to meet quotas. One email, from a supervisor named Maria Flores, was particularly damning. It had an attachment, a spreadsheet meticulously detailing 1,400 hours of unpaid overtime over a single quarter. In her email, Flores wrote, "We are risking a major labor violation. These people are exhausted and unpaid. Please advise." The reply from Celia's office was a one-line email. "This has been noted and resolved." Resolved. That was Celia's favorite word. It was a digital tombstone. I cross-referenced the spreadsheet with the plant's official payroll records. The 1,300 hours were gone. Vanished. It was clean, perfect fraud. But they made a mistake. They altered the payroll logs. But they didn't think to alter the security logs. They controlled HR and finance, but not physical security. I pulled the video archives from the shipping bay cameras at Cobalt Ridge, the ones time-stamped by an independent, networked server. The footage showed the night shift workers. The ones whose time cards said they clocked out at 2 a.m. were still there, loading trucks at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., their faces pale with exhaustion under the harsh sodium lights. Payroll data and video data, when placed side by side, they told a story of theft on a massive scale. The anonymous HR hotline was an even deeper rot. Celia had championed it as a triumph of her people-first culture, a safe space for our family. She'd called it in a company-wide memo. I ran a system audit. I discovered that the anonymity was a fiction. The software had a back-end administrative portal. There was only one user with clearance to access the raw data, including the supposedly masked identities of the callers. Celia Drake. I found logs of dozens of calls, complaints of harassment, safety violations, wage theft, all of them tagged in the system with the same digital signature, all of them marked resolved by CD. With this, I had enough. I began to build the official file. I am a licensed whistleblower. I know the protocols. I compiled the evidence, the emails, the payroll versus camera logs, the audit of the HR hotline, into a single, encrypted file. I followed the procedures outlined by both state and federal whistleblower protection laws. I filed the initial report through the correct channels, receiving a sealed case number from the State Attorney General's office. The communication was routed through our external legal counsel, Jenna Morales. The name I had CC'd on this morning's town hall invitation. She was bound by attorney-client privilege with the audit committee, not with the CEO. She was my firewall. I backed up everything. I created a secure, read-only data warehouse on a private cloud server, completely disconnected from Cedarline's network. The data was partitioned, with different encryption keys for different sets of evidence. The key for my personal log of Celia's abuse was one level. The key for the Cobalt Ridge wage theft was another. I shared these keys on a tiered basis. The audit committee chair had access to the corporate malfeasance files. Jenna Morales had access to everything. A third key, for the most sensitive data, was placed in a sealed digital envelope with instructions to be released to the press if anything were to happen to me. It was my dead man's switch. The final piece of the puzzle, however, was the one that would connect Celia's greed directly to her own family. It was the one that required all my skill in forensic accounting. Every publicly traded company lives and dies by its supply chain. I started mapping ours. I focused on new vendors, particularly those approved in the last 2 years. Since Celia's power had been consolidated, one name stood out: Greenspan Logistics. They had been awarded an exclusive, no-bid contract for refrigerated transport on the West Coast. The contract was enormous, worth tens of millions. It was also, on paper, completely inefficient. Their rates were 15% higher than our previous carrier. The vendor onboarding file was signed and personally approved by Celia Drake. The justification was a single, vague sentence: superior service and alignment with Cedarline's ethical sourcing standards. I started digging into Greenspan. They were a ghost, a registered address that led to a mail drop in Delaware. No physical assets listed. They were a shell company. I ran a trace on the incorporator. A generic legal service, but they had to file for permits, for interstate transport licenses, and on one of those filings, in the state of Nevada, was a signature: a man named David Miller. A simple background check on David Miller revealed nothing. But I wasn't looking for him. I was looking for his network. I cross-referenced his known associates with Celia's, and there it was. David Miller's sister was married to Celia's younger brother, Julian. It was still circumstantial. I needed the final link. I found it buried in the fine print of the vendor contract Celia had signed. An appendix, page 47, detailed a success fee and a logistical consulting bonus to be paid not to Greenspan Logistics, but directly to a numbered entity, the Kestrel Family Trust. Trusts are designed for privacy, but they are not invulnerable. Using a series of legal, publicly accessible database searches, I found the articles of incorporation for the Kestrel Family Trust. The sole trustee and beneficiary, Julian Vance, Celia's brother. It was perfect, elegant, a closed loop of fraud. Celia had used her power as CPO to award a grossly inflated, non-competitive contract to a shell company owned by her own brother, disguised through a trust. She was siphoning millions of dollars from the company she was sworn to serve. And I had the contract. I had the trust documents. I had her signature. They thought I was just the girl in the corner office, the one who reviewed data policies. They had no idea that for months, I had been mapping their crimes, one forgotten file, one buried email, one arrogant signature at a time. The hunt was over. All that was left was the presentation of the kill. The email invitation, with its pointed CC to the audit committee and external counsel, had landed in their inboxes at 8:32 a.m. It took less than 15 minutes. My desk phone, the one I rarely used, rang with the internal extension. It was Celia's executive assistant. "Ava, Celia was hoping you could pop up to her office. She has a quick thought on your town hall." "Of course," I said, my voice smooth. "On my way." Celia's office was on the 35th floor, the executive floor, where my 28th floor office was functional. Hers was a statement. It was a corner suite with panoramic views, furnished with soft gray couches, abstract art, and orchids. The air smelled faintly of bergamot. She was the chief people officer. Her space was designed to be the opposite of intimidating. It was designed to make you feel safe, to encourage you to share. She was standing by the window when I entered, a tablet in her hand. She turned, and the smile she gave me was bright, warm, and utterly false. It was the smile of a predator that knows you've cornered yourself. "Ava, darling, thank you for coming up." She walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of warm mentorship. I didn't flinch. Her fingers pressed down, just for a second, a micro gesture of dominance. "This town hall idea? It's brilliant, proactive, exactly what we should be doing." She gestured for me to sit on one of the plush sofas. I remained standing. "I'm glad you think so," I said. Given the feedback, I felt a direct, transparent approach was best. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, flicked for a fraction of a second to my left cheek. I had covered the bruise well, but the concealer couldn't hide the faint, unnatural flatness of the makeup or the tiny, raised line of the cut. She saw it, and she saw that I had hidden it. To her, this was the ultimate sign of my submission. I was so cowed, so ashamed, that I was hiding the evidence of her attack. Her smile widened, became genuine. She thought my town hall, my CC to the board, was a terrified, bureaucratic attempt to protect her, a desperate move to show I was on the company side after my brief, childish outburst this morning. "Which is why," she said, her tone dripping with magnanimity, "I don't think you should have to handle this alone. It's a big undertaking. I'd like to co-host it with you. We can present a united front, from the C-suite and from compliance." And then, the words that were meant to seal the bargain, to pull me back into the fold, to remind me of the pact of silence. "We're family, Ava." Her eyes held mine, searching. They were still looking at my cheek. I had to fight the urge to touch the tender skin. I understood. This was my penance. I had misbehaved. I miss Mom. I had been corrected. Grow up. And now I was being offered a chance to prove my loyalty again by helping her control the narrative. This co-hosting wasn't a promotion. It was a leash. "Thank you, Celia," I said, forcing a small, grateful smile. "I'd appreciate that. A united front is a great idea." I let her believe she had won. I let her feel the full, satisfying rush of her power. It was crucial that she walked into that room this afternoon feeling completely, fundamentally in control. "Excellent," she said, turning back to the window, the discussion clearly over. "I do have one suggestion," I added, my voice casual, as if the thought had just struck me. She turned back, impatient. "Since the theme is transparency and direct feedback, what if we incorporate a real-time polling system? We can have employees scan a QR code, answer a few key questions anonymously from their phones. The results display live on the main screen. It's great for engagement. Very people first." I used her own words. I watched her process the suggestion. I could see the calculation in her eyes. Anonymous data? Live? It was a risk. But then, arrogance won. She was Celia Drake. There wasn't a poll, a question, or a piece of data in the world that she couldn't spin. What would they ask? "Do you feel supported? Is HR accessible?" She would use the results, no matter what they were, as a brave and exciting opportunity for us to learn and grow together. She thought she was controlling the message. "I love it," she said, a decisive nod. "That's innovative. Data-driven wellness. See to it. Have the questions on my desk by noon for approval." "I'll have them to you in an hour," I said. I left her office. The first part of the trap was set. My next stop was not my desk. It was the AV control room on the 34th floor, adjacent to the Apex room. I found the lead technician, a man named Ben, who I had worked with on several compliance training videos. "Ben," I said, keeping my voice low and urgent, "I've got a high-priority request for the 4 p.m. town hall. It's coming down from the C-suite." I invoked their authority. Ben, used to last-minute executive demands, just nodded, pulling up the work order. "I see the 3-camera, isolated audio request. What's up?" "First," I said, "I need a dedicated UPS backup for your entire recording station. not the house power. A separate, physical battery backup. We can't risk a single-second dropout. If the feed even flickers, it's a data integrity problem. He raised an eyebrow. It's all on the building's generator circuit. Ava. I know, I said. But this is a compliance directive. We need a redundant power source, independent of the building grid. It's for the integrity of the record. Call it a litigation hold protocol. The legal jargon worked. He shrugged. Fine. I've got a portable unit. It'll be ugly, but it'll work. What else? This was the critical part. The isolated feeds. I need the primary, broadcast mixed feed to go to the house archive, as usual. But the 3 raw, isolated camera feeds and the 3 raw, isolated audio channels, I need those recorded separately. Separately? Like, to different files? To a different machine, I corrected. I'm bringing down a secure, encrypted hard drive from my office. It's a read-only compliance server. I want you to run a simultaneous, direct line recording from the board to that drive, a clean, external backup. The one on the house server is the broadcast copy. The one on my drive is the unalterable master record. For our external counsel, you just plug it in and hit record. I'll handle the rest. He looked at me, understanding the subtext. This wasn't a normal town hall. This was an evidentiary proceeding. Got it, he said, his voice dropping. 1 house copy, 1 external master copy. No one touches the master but you. Exactly, I said. I returned to my desk. I typed up the real-time poll questions. They were perfectly banal. On a scale of 1 to 5, how supported do you feel by your direct manager? Do you feel Cedar Line's people-first culture is reflected in your daily work? Do you believe our HR department provides a safe and effective channel for concerns? Do you feel confident that you can report unethical behavior without fear of retaliation? Celia approved them via email without a single change. I then updated the official agenda for the meeting. Opening remarks, Celia Drake, Thomas Drake. Our commitment to wellness, Ava Drake. Real-time employee poll, live. Analysis of poll data and open Q&A, all. Closing remarks. I sent the final agenda to her assistant. Then, I opened my private copy. I added a 5th item and renumbered the last one. Opening remarks. Our commitment to wellness. Real-time employee poll, live. Anonymous case study. A qualitative data review. Analysis and open Q&A. Closing remarks. Anonymous case study. It was so boring, so blessedly corporate. It sounded like something out of a business school textbook. Celia, busy preparing her sweeping, inspiring remarks, would never read the revised version, but it was now logged in the system. At 2:15 p.m., my phone vibrated with a text message. It was from my father. Keep it positive. Ava, this is a wellness meeting, not a grievance session. The board is listening. We need to project stability. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't asking about my face. He was worried about the stock price. He was worried about the audit committee. He saw my CC and interpreted it as a sign of weakness, an unnecessary escalation. His text was a command. I typed back a single, reassuring, filial reply. Of course. My desktop email pinged. It was from Robert Harrison, the chair of the audit committee. His email was a dry response to my original meeting invite. Ms. Drake, thank you for the proactive notification. Given the subject matter, members of the committee will be attending the broadcast. We are here to listen. To listen. It was the code I was waiting for. It wasn't passive. It was the formal acknowledgement that my whistleblower complaint was now active. Listening meant they were officially observing, and the proceedings were now under their purview. I had the stage, I had the cameras, I had the audience. Now, I needed the living witnesses. I opened a new, encrypted email from my private account. I sent it to the personal Gmail address of Maria Flores, the night shift manager at the Cobalt Ridge plant, the one whose emails about unpaid overtime had been resolved. I had found her address months ago. The subject was 4 p.m. today. The body was If you want to be paid for the hours you worked, be in the audience at the 4 p.m. town hall. I have reserved you a seat. A. It was a risk. I didn't know if she would come. I didn't know if she would be too scared, but I had to give her the choice. Finally, I checked the physical security rota for the 34th floor. The shift change was at 3:00 p.m. The guard assigned to the executive floor for the 3:11 p.m. shift was a man named Leo. I knew Leo. I'd cross-referenced the anonymous hotline logs with the security desk's internal visitor and complaint logs. 6 months ago, Leo had filed a formal report about being pressured by a mid-level executive to escort an employee's disruptive ex-boyfriend into the building, a clear violation of a restraining order. The HR hotline call I'd unearthed, the one marked resolved by CD, was from an anonymous guard, reporting the exact same incident, terrified that he was being forced to participate in a potentially dangerous situation. The guard who had been brave enough to call, the guard Celia had ignored. He would be the one standing at the door when the meeting started. He would be the one who would, if necessary, be called to speak. All the pieces were in place, the digital, the financial, and the human, all converging on the 34th floor glass room. I stood at my podium. My father was at his, a pillar of granite stability. Celia was at hers, radiating a practiced, executive warmth. The apex room was so quiet you could hear the click of her pen as she uncapped it. On the massive screen behind us, the Cedarline logo glowed, reflected in the polished floor. Glass walls surrounded us, trapping the afternoon light, making us actors on a stage suspended 40 stories above the city. My father and Celia had delivered their opening remarks, a seamless duet of corporate reassurance. They spoke of our Cedarline family, challenging headwinds, and our shared commitment. It was a performance they had perfected. Now it was my turn. "Thank you. Celia, Thomas," I said. My voice, amplified by the microphone, was cool and steady. As we announced, this is a dialogue on well-being, and all real dialogue must begin with data. I clicked the remote. The Cedarline logo was replaced by a QR code and a simple instruction. Please scan the code on the screen. We are beginning with a brief, anonymous, real-time poll. A murmur went through the room of 200 managers, VPs, and department heads. Phones were raised. This was new. Celia smiled. This was her idea. Innovative, transparent. Question 1, I said, as the first results populated. On a scale of 1 to 5, how supported do you feel by your direct manager? The bars on the screen shifted and settled. A respectable 3.9 average. A pale blue agree bar dominated the chart. "This is excellent," Celia interjected, leaning into her microphone. "This shows the strength of our line managers, and—" I cut her off. Question 2. Do you feel Cedarline's people-first culture is reflected in your daily work? The bars shifted again. The agree bar was smaller this time, 52%. Disagree and neutral made up the rest. A ripple of unease. I saw my father shift his weight. "This shows we have work to do," Celia said quickly, "which is precisely—" Question 3, I continued, my voice overriding hers. The camera follow cam 2, as instructed, stayed on me. "Do you believe our HR department provides a safe and effective channel for concerns?" This was the question that mattered. The room was silent, watching the screen. The bars didn't just shift, they fought. The red strongly disagree bar shot across the screen, a bleeding artery. The orange disagree bar followed it. The green agree bar was a sliver. The poll locked. The final numbers were stark. "Do you trust HR to protect you?" Yes. 21%. 58%. Uncertain. 21%. A collective. Sharp intake of breath sucked the air from the room. 21%. The tight follow cam swiveled to Celia. Her smile was a rictus, a painful, frozen mask. Her skin was pale. She laughed, a short, sharp, brittle sound that the microphone amplified into a gunshot. "Well," she said, her voice strained, This is brave data. This is why we're here. To learn. To listen. This 21% is not a failure. It is a foundation. It is an exciting opportunity for us to— "Thank you, Celia," I said, my voice cutting through her spin. The camera snapped back to me. "You're right. It is a foundation, and to understand the why behind this 21%, we need to move from quantitative data to qualitative analysis." I clicked the remote. The poll vanished. The screen went white. Black text appeared. Agenda Item 4. Anonymous Case Study. A Qualitative Data Review. Celia's head snapped toward me. Her eyes were wide. This was not on the agenda she had approved. My father leaned forward, his brow furrowed, a silent, "What is this?" expression on his face. "To understand why 58% of our employees do not trust HR," I said, addressing the room, "we need to examine a specific case study. This incident was reported this morning." I clicked again. The image filled the 20-foot screen. It was my photograph, high resolution, clinical, unforgiving, the angry mottled red and burgeoning purple on my left cheekbone, the faint, swollen white outlines of 4 fingers, the small, precise, dark red cut just below the bone, where her ring had connected. And beneath it, white text on a black bar, timestamp, 7:12 a.m., October 22nd, 2025. The room died. It was not silence. It was the absolute, pressurized absence of sound. No one coughed. No one moved. 200 people stared at the image, then at me, standing at the podium, the concealer on my face now a pathetic, translucent lie under the harsh lights. They stared at Celia, who was frozen, her mouth slightly open. I heard it then, the only sound in the universe, the high, thin, electronic whine of the air conditioning system, pushing sterile, cold air into the glass cage. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2, 3. "This is an anonymous submission," I said, my voice echoing in the dead quiet. "It is a textbook example of a breakdown in trust. The employee, in their own home, expressed a personal sentiment. In response, a senior executive, an executive whose entire job is people first, physically assaulted them." I leaned into the microphone. The executive's words, upon striking the employee, were, "Grow up." Celia made a sound, a small, choked gasp. My father stared at the screen, his face ashen. He knew my face. He knew her words. He had been there. "This," I continued, "is why our trust is at 21%, because the policies we write are only as real as the home that writes them." Before either of them could move, before my father could formulate a response, I clicked the remote. "But this culture of resolved issues," I said, "is not just personal, it is systemic, and it is theft." The screen split. On the left, a scanned copy of a payroll report from the Cobalt Ridge plant. Night shift, week 34. All employees clocked out at 2:00 a.m. On the right, a high-contrast screenshot from the shipping bay security camera. The timestamp, 4:35 a.m. The same employees, pale with exhaustion, were loading trucks. "This is 1 week," I said. "I have found 1,400 hours of unpaid overtime from this plant in the last quarter alone. Wage theft. This was reported to HR, to the CPO's office, by the plant supervisor. The official response, the matter was resolved." "Ava." My father's voice. It was a command, a low, furious growl that cut through the room. He was gripping his lectern, leaning forward. The CEO. "This is not the forum," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is an internal matter. We will review this, offline." The follow-cam snapped to him, capturing the barely controlled rage in his eyes. I did not look at him. I looked at the camera with the red light, the one broadcasting this feed to the entire company, the one being recorded for the board. "We are not offline, Thomas," I said. I used his name. The room gasped. "We are live. The entire company is watching, and the audit committee is in attendance." A new voice, not from the room, but from the room's speakers. Cut in. It was crisp, digital, and carried absolute authority. "Mr. Drake, Ms. Drake, this is Robert Harrison, the chair of the audit committee." My father's face went from rage to shock. "The committee concurs with Ms. Drake." Harrison's voice boomed. "This is precisely the forum. Please continue. Ava, we are all listening, and we are particularly interested in the next item. Please proceed to your analysis of supplier integrity." It was a checkmate. My father was trapped. He couldn't overrule the board. He physically recoiled from his podium, as if he'd been struck. I turned back to the audience. I clicked the remote. The screen changed. The blue and green logo of Greenspan Logistics appeared. "This is Greenspan Logistics," I said, my voice cold, clinical. "A new preferred vendor for our West Coast refrigerated transport. Awarded an exclusive, no-bid contract 9 months ago. A contract approved and personally signed by our Chief People Officer, Celia Drake." Celia was staring, her eyes wide with panic. This was a new attack, one she couldn't have predicted. "This contract was 15% above market rate," I continued. "The justification was superior service, but Greenspan has no trucks, it has no drivers, it has no assets. It is a shell company, registered to a mail drop in Delaware." I clicked again. A complex ownership chart filled the screen, a flow chart of money. It showed Greenspan Logistics, owned by a holding company, which was, in turn, owned by a separate legal entity, the Kestrel Family Trust. "A shell company," I narrated, "funneling millions of dollars in consulting and success fees directly to this trust, a trust whose sole trustee and beneficiary, according to public incorporation documents." I clicked one last time. The name appeared in 72-point font. Julian Vance. "Is Celia's brother," I finished. The room exploded, not in noise, in a single, sharp, collective gasp. It was the sound of 200 people simultaneously understanding the sheer, breathtaking scale of the fraud. Then, another sound, a sharp, violent, scraping screech of wood on metal. Celia had stumbled back, knocking her chair, her hand flying to her lectern to steady herself. She was staring at her brother's name, her face a mask of pure, white terror. She reached for her water glass, but her hand was shaking so badly she couldn't lift it. She gripped the glass, her knuckles turning bone white, her tendons straining. She gripped it so hard. I waited for the glass to shatter in her fist. She was no longer the CPO. She was no longer the stepmother. She was just a cornered executive in a glass room, the cameras rolling, with nowhere left to hide. Celia's knuckles were white, her entire body rigid. She looked trapped, because she was. My father was staring at the name Julian Vance on the screen, the gears of his mind grinding, processing the implication, the sheer, brazen illegality of it. He was a CEO. He understood what a shell company and a conflict of interest meant. He understood this was not a mistake. This was a crime. "This is," Celia finally stammered, her voice a dry rasp. "This is a misrepresentation. This is taken out of context. Julian Vance is a common name. This is an error." Her voice was thin, unconvincing. The CPO, the master of rhetoric, was reduced to, "It's a common name." "Is it?" I asked, my voice flat. I clicked the remote. The screen changed. It was no longer a chart. It was a high-resolution scan of a document. The vendor onboarding and master services agreement between Cedar Line Foods and Greenspan Logistics. "This is the contract," I said. "The one that was routed through the CPO's office for ethical and cultural compliance approval." I let the room read the title. Then I clicked again. The image zoomed to the signature block on the final page. Page 28. "Approved and agreed. Celia Vance Drake, Chief People Officer, Cedar Line Foods." Her signature, a flamboyant, confident C that looped aggressively over the rest of her name, was there for everyone to see. It was dated 11 months ago. "And this," I said, clicking one more time. Is the document you routed? Celia, page 47, Appendix C, Schedule of Fees. The screen zoomed in on the fine print, a single line item buried under Administrative Charges. Item 4.3b, Annual Logistical Success Fee. Amount, 1.2% of total contract value. Payable quarterly. Payable to the Kestrel Family Trust. A seat, 7701B, Wilmington Trust. This success fee, I said, was not payable to Greenspan Logistics, the vendor. It was payable directly to your brother's private trust, a fee for a no-bid contract that you, and only you, approved. Celia was hyperventilating, her hand pressed to her chest. You are lying, she hissed, though the mic picked it up as a desperate, amplified whisper. There is no conflict. I followed all procedures. Procedures? I replied. I clicked the remote. The contract vanished. The screen was filled with text. A quote. It was from the Cedar Line Foods Employee Code of Conduct, the one every employee had to sign, the one Celia herself had authored and championed in a company-wide video last year. I read the words aloud, my voice slow and deliberate, letting each one land. Section 4A. Conflicts of Interest. We, as a Cedar Line family, must hold ourselves to the highest possible standard. There is zero tolerance for any actual, potential, or perceived conflict of interest. This includes any financial relationship, direct or indirect, with a family member that involves the company. Full, transparent, written disclosure to the audit committee is mandatory before any discussion takes place. I paused and looked directly at Celia. The follow-cam zoomed in on her face, capturing the sweat on her upper lip. Celia, I asked, my voice dropping, can you please direct us to the written disclosure you filed with the audit committee regarding your brother's trust? She had no answer. She just stared, her mask of executive competence shattered, revealing the raw panic beneath. My father took a step forward, his hand raised. Enough, Ava. This meeting is over. We will handle this. We will handle this internally. Security. He was shouting now, but Leo, the guard at the door, didn't move. He looked at me, and I gave him the slightest shake of my head. This meeting is not over, Thomas, I said. And right at that moment, as if summoned by the word security, the heavy glass doors at the back of the Apex room hissed open. It wasn't Leo. Two individuals, a man and a woman, entered. They were not dressed in corporate attire. They wore dark, conservative, functional suits. They carried unassuming leather briefcases. They moved with a quiet, unhurried purpose that instantly commanded the room's attention. Every head turned. They were not corporate security. They were investigators. They walked calmly down the center aisle, their footsteps silent on the thick carpet. They did not look at me. They did not look at Celia or my father. They walked directly to the AV station at the side of the room, where the feed to the audit committee was live. They stopped and looked at the small screen displaying Robert Harrison's face. The man spoke, his voice clear and official, not needing a microphone in the stunned silence. Mr. Harrison, this is Investigator Miles, State Attorney General's Office, Civil Division. We are here to serve a subpoena ducis tecum for all records, communications, and documents related to vendor Greenspan Logistics, the Kestrel Family Trust, and the Cobalt Ridge plant payroll, pursuant to... Robert Harrison's voice cut him off, amplified through the room. We are aware, Investigator, Cedar Line Foods is in full cooperation. The legal preservation order is already in effect. Ms. Morales, you are authorized. Jenna Morales, our external counsel, who had been listening silently on the feed, spoke for the first time. Mr. Harrison, members of the board, I can confirm the company is in receipt of the subpoena. We are enacting an immediate, independent special review, managed by my firm on behalf of the audit committee. Celia let out a small, strangled sound. Independent special review. The words that every executive dreads. It meant she was locked out. It meant her power was gone. Furthermore, Harrison's voice boomed, The board is aware that these findings were brought to our attention by a protected whistleblower. This was my cue. This was the moment I sealed my own protection. I stepped forward. "Mr. Harrison," I said, my voice clear and formal. "For the record, I am the whistleblower. The complaint was filed with your office and the Attorney General under the sealed case number WB 2025-09482. I am formally submitting my complete findings to the special review, effective immediately." Jenna Morales' voice was immediate. "We can confirm, as counsel to the committee, that case number WB 2025-09482 was received, validated, and escalated by the Attorney General's office 1 week ago. Ms. Drake's status as a whistleblower is protected under state and federal law." It was done. A legal iron cage had just snapped shut around Celia, and it had been built with materials she had provided. "In accordance with the preservation order," Jenna Morales continued, "our IT team will now execute a freeze on the relevant data systems. Ben?" At the AV desk, Ben, the technician, who had been waiting for this exact command, nodded. He didn't look at my father. He looked at the investigator. He typed a command into his console. "The company email, file share, and financial servers for the executive floor are now frozen," Ben announced, his voice surprisingly steady. "All inbound and outbound traffic is suspended and routed to the forensic archive." Celia's head snapped up. She understood. She couldn't delete. She couldn't call for help. She couldn't transfer a single dollar. Ben then looked at me. "Ava, per counsel's instructions?" "Switch the feed, Ben," I ordered. He hit a final switch. The red lights on the 3 broadcast cameras in the room did not turn off. They simply stopped feeding the company-wide town hall stream. They were now feeding a single, secure, encrypted channel, accessible only by the investigators and the audit committee's legal team. This was no longer a wellness meeting. It was a deposition. I looked at my father. He had shrunk. The CEO who had sipped his coffee was gone. He was an old man in an expensive suit. Sweat was beading on his forehead, running from his hairline. He had tugged at his collar, and his navy blue tie was now visibly askew, a small, perfect symbol of his unraveling. His face was a mask of gray, horrified realization. He wasn't just watching his wife be exposed. He was watching his company, his legacy, his name, be dismantled, live, in front of his own employees. He looked at me. His eyes were not angry. They were pleading. He was just now understanding that the daughter he ignored was the one person who held the power to destroy him. I held his gaze for a second, then I turned away from him, from the investigators, from Celia, who was now being quietly spoken to by the second investigator. I turned back to the audience. They were frozen, a sea of shocked, terrified, and in some corners, vindicated faces. I stepped back to the microphone. My hands were perfectly steady. My voice was even, calm, and clear, as if I were merely moving to the next item on an agenda. "We will now proceed to employee questions." My announcement hung in the air, a declaration of war in a room already choked with tension. "We will now proceed to employee questions." It was a violation of the corporate order. The CEO was crumbling, the CPO was exposed, and the Attorney General's office was present. This was not a Q&A. This was a reckoning. For a moment, no one moved. The 200 people in the audience were a frozen sea of shock. Then, from the third row, a hand went up. Not a tentative, fearful hand, a strong one. A hand calloused by work, not by signing memos. A woman stood up. She was not an executive. She wore a functional blouse and slacks, her hair pulled back in a severe, practical bun. Her face was etched with a profound exhaustion that had nothing to do with this meeting and everything to do with her life. It was Maria Flores, the night shift supervisor from Cobalt Ridge, the one I had emailed this morning. She had come. She had actually come. Ben, the AV tech, was already on it. He pointed her to the wireless microphone on the central table. She walked forward, her steps measured, her back straight. She picked up the microphone. The sound of her taking a single, steadying breath filled the speakers. "My name is Maria Flores," she said. Her voice was clear, with a slight tremor, not of fear, but of pure, concentrated adrenaline. "I am the shift supervisor at the Cobalt Ridge plant." Celia, who was standing stiffly between the two investigators, flinched. The name had landed like a physical blow. My father, slumped against his podium, looked up, his eyes glassy and unfocused. "You called this meeting for wellness," Maria continued, the words sounding like acid in her mouth. "I want to talk about wellness. 3 nights ago, the Zone 4 freezer line failed. We had 50,000 pounds of product that was going to spoil. The directive came down from corporate, from her office." She didn't look at Celia. She gestured toward the executive row. "The directive was, meet the quota, no excuses. Failure, we were told, was not an option." The tremor in her voice vanished, replaced by a cold, hard anger that had been simmering for years. "My crew, my people, they worked. They worked 14 straight hours, from 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next morning, 14 hours in a 35-degree room, lifting 60-pound crates, to save that product. When I submitted the payroll, 14 hours for 22 people, I got a call from the director of HR operations." She looked past me, past the podium, to the investigators. "He told me there must be a system glitch. He said it was impossible to have that much overtime. He told me to fix the numbers, or he would find a supervisor who could. He told me to resubmit the timesheets for 8 hours. Just the standard shift," he said. "The company appreciates their effort." The room was so quiet. The silence felt heavy, solid. "My crew has families," Maria's voice cracked, the emotion finally breaking through. "They have children to feed. They are working 14 hours, and they are being paid for 8. I sent 4 emails. I sent the spreadsheet. I called the anonymous hotline." She finally turned her head and pinned Celia with a gaze so full of contempt it was almost a physical force. "And the official response I received, signed by HR? Resolved. My people were stolen from, and you called it resolved." Before anyone could react, the dam broke. "She's right." A man stood up abruptly from the back row. He was a junior analyst from the finance department. Young, his face pale. He was shaking, holding his own phone up as if it were a shield. I never called the hotline. I never filed a complaint. My manager, he's been harassing me for months. Subtle things. I was scared. I just tried to ignore it. I just wanted it to stop. But then, 2 weeks ago, I got this email." He read from his phone, his voice high and thin, vibrating with a terrible, new understanding. "Dear employee, thank you for raising your concern via the anonymous HR portal. We have investigated your claim regarding your manager and after a thorough review, have found no violation of company policy. We consider this matter resolved. Signed, Cedar Line HR." He looked up, his eyes wide and panicked. "I never reported it. I never spoke to anyone. They knew. They were watching me, and they closed a case I never even opened. They were protecting him." A third voice, deeper, near the door. It was Leo, the security guard. He had stepped forward, into the room, his arms crossed. He looked directly at the investigators. "They made me delete the logs," he said, his voice heavy with disgust. "The VP of sales, he had a personal guest. The man was aggressive, not on the visitor list. I refused entry. The VP threatened my job. An hour later, I got a call from HR. Said they were diagnosing a storage glitch on the lobby camera servers. They ordered me to manually purge the server archives from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. to save drive space," they said. He shook his head. "It wasn't a glitch. It was a cover-up. They were ordering me to destroy the evidence of the incident. They were making me an accomplice." The room was no longer silent. It was buzzing, a low, angry hum of shared trauma, of dawning realizations, Years of separate, resolved injustices were suddenly connecting, forming a single, horrifying picture. I had them, the human testimony, the living proof of the data I had shown. I looked at Ben, the AV tech. He was already anticipating me. "Ben," I said, my voice clear and loud. "Quad screen, isolate the witnesses." Ben's fingers flew across his console, the massive screen behind us, which had been showing the static corporate logo, flickered. It split into 4 equal quadrants. Top left, the live, tight shot of Maria Flores, her face a mask of righteous fury, wage theft. Top right, the junior analyst, pale and shaking, holding his phone, harassment, illegal surveillance, cover-up. Bottom left, Leo, the guard, his jaw set, his arms crossed, coercion, destruction of evidence. Bottom right, the cold, clinical photograph of my own bruised face from 7:12 a.m., assault, executive malfeasance. 4 faces, 4 victims, 4 different stories, all leading back to one department, one person, all resolved. The room exploded, not in noise, but in a collective, physical recoil. People stood up, people gasped, VPs in the front row, men and women who had been Celia's allies, her friends, physically backed away from where she stood, as if she were diseased. Celia saw it. She saw the screen, the 4 faces. She saw the investigators writing, their faces impassive. She saw the audience turn on her. The last threads of her control snapped. She lunged for her microphone, her face a grotesque mask of denial. "No!" she shrieked, the audio feedback screaming through the speakers. "No, this is a lie. It's a misunderstanding. These are isolated incidents, unrelated. You're twisting this. It's a setup. This is not what it looks like." She was pleading now, looking wildly from the investigators to my father, to the audience. "These are just HR matters, internal procedures. They were being handled. You can't just park all of this on me." Park this. The phrase, the exact phrase, the words I had been waiting for her to say. "You're right, Celia," I said, my voice cutting through her desperate, chaotic noise. "It's not what it looks like." I clicked the remote. The quad screen vanished, the room went silent, and then, from the speakers, a new sound, a clean digital audio file. Click. A man's voice, nervous, tinny from the phone recording. "And I'm just saying, it's not safe. The VP is forcing me to violate a restraining order. If something happens to her, I'm liable." And then, her voice, cold, impatient, unmistakable. "Celia, audio file. HR Hotline Anonymous 044. Wave. I understand your concern. I've heard you. But the VP is a high-value asset. We can't have this distracting him. I need you to just park this, park it. Understand? It doesn't exist. We never had this conversation." Click. The audio file ended. The silence that followed was a vacuum. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. It was the sound of a dynasty ending. It was no longer a gasp. It was a roar, a deep, visceral wave of human disgust. "Oh my God. She said it. She said, 'Park this.'" People were covering their mouths. One woman in the front row openly wept. The investigators looked at each other and nodded. It was over. Celia looked at the speakers, then at me. Her face was no longer panicked. It was hollow, empty. She had been surgically, publicly, and completely annihilated. And then, finally, my father moved. He surged forward, his face a mottled, dark red. He was no longer a CEO. He was a cornered animal, a failed patriarch. He didn't look at me. He pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at Ben, the AV tech. "End the stream," he bellowed. his voice cracking with fury and terror. "I am the CEO. I am ordering you to shut it down. Turn it off, now." Ben froze, his hands raised from the console. The investigators took a step toward my father. Leo tensed by the door. I didn't shout. I didn't move toward him. I simply reached down to my briefcase, which sat at the foot of my podium. I pulled out a small, leather-bound booklet, the Cedar Line Foods, Corporate Charter and Bylaws. I held it up, high, for him, the cameras, and the investigators to see. "You can't," I said. My voice was not loud, but it sliced through his roar, silencing the room once more. He stopped, his momentum broken, confused. What did you say?" "You can't end the stream," I said. I had the page bookmarked. I opened it. Article 2, Section 4, Special Proceedings of the Board. Once an independent special review has been formally convened by the Audit Committee. I glanced at the monitor where Robert Harrison's face was watching, impassive. He knew. "All corporate officers," I continued, my voice gaining strength, "including the Chief Executive Officer, are explicitly barred from interfering with the proceedings, the collection of evidence, or the internal broadcast of said proceedings. Any attempt to do so is," and I quote, "a terminable offense and a breach of fiduciary duty." I held the book out to him. "You invoked the board. Father, they are presiding now. You are no longer in charge here. You are just a witness." I stared at him, the man who had sipped his coffee, the man who had told me we're late. He looked at the small, leather-bound book. He looked at the investigators. He looked at the unblinking red light of the camera that was still recording his every breath. He opened his mouth. No sound came out. He took a step back, and then another. He stumbled, just slightly, as if his expensive leather-soled shoe had suddenly found a patch of ice on the polished floor. He looked down, surprised at his own faltering, then back up at me. His eyes were wide, not with anger anymore, but with the sudden, dizzying, terrifying realization of the fall. He had lost his footing. He was in free fall. He said nothing. He just retreated, backing away until his shoulders hit the cold glass wall of the apex room, a defeated, sweating man, his tie askew, trapped in the ruins of the empire he built. "EU lại tiêu đề của phần này. Trả lại kết quả cho tôi, chỉ gồm nội dung của phần này và không gồm gì khác. Nội dung truyện không có nhân vật nào tên là Chen, hay trong tên có chữ Chen. Trong câu chuyện tuyệt đối không được có các hành động hành hạ hay ngược đãi trẻ em. Hãy trả lại kết quả cho tôi luôn trong hộp thoại chất này. Không sử dụng hộp thoại Canvas, không có các ký tự đặc biệt như dầu hay dầu. Dưới đây là nội dung dàn ý của phần 8, theo dàn ý bạn đã ghi nhớ mà tôi muốn bạn viết. Sự thất về tôi và di chúc của mẹ. Phong cách viết. Tĩnh lặng sau bão. Tiết lộ bất ngờ, nhưng được gieo mầm từ đầu. Câu chữ gọn sắc. Nói đấng. Tôi công bố thư của mẹ gửi luật sư ủy ban. If Ava is ever harmed, release. Tài liệu đính kèm. Quyền chọn cổ phiếu chuyển sang quỹ do tôi làm trustee. Tỷ lệ sở hữu thức của tôi. Đủ để yêu cầu bỏ phiếu bất tín nhiệm tạm thời. Bố tôi nhìn sung, nếp nhăn quanh mặt như nứt. Tôi không nhìn ông, tôi nhìn hàng ghế nhân viên. Tôi đề xuất nghị quyết. Đình chỉ Celia, bổ nhiệm giám đốc nhân sự tẩm quyền độc lập. Ủy ban kiểm toán ủng hộ. Luật sư xác nhận quy trình phù hợp điều lệ. Phòng dơ thế, phiếu đủ. Cửa kính mở. Celia phải giao nộp thẻ ra vào. Tôi nhận chiếc thẻ đó từ tay bảo vệ và đặt xuống bàn. The chaos subsided. The roar of outrage faded into a thick, watchful silence. The air in the apex room, once electric with tension, was now heavy, still, like the moments after a lightning strike. My father remained pressed against the glass wall, a man pinned by the weight of his own corporate bylaws. Celia stood vacant between the two investigators, her face a hollow mask. The employees were standing, a silent, 200-person jury, waiting for the final verdict. This was not just about Celia's crimes anymore. This was about the foundation of the company itself. My father, in his panic, had tried to reassert his authority as CEO. He had forgotten who I was. Not his daughter, not the quiet girl from the dinner table. I was a compliance officer, and my ultimate compliance was not to him, but to the woman who had truly built this company's soul, long before he and Celia had tarnished it. "Mr. Harrison?" I said, my voice calm and formal, addressing the speakerphone where the audit committee chair was listening. "There is one final piece of documentation, one I was instructed to release only under specific circumstances." Jenna Morales, the external counsel, spoke. "What documentation, Ava?" "A letter," I said. "From my mother, Elizabeth Drake." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into a still pond. My father's head jerked up. His eyes, which had been glazed with shock, suddenly focused on me with a terrifying intensity. "It was delivered to the firm of Wilmer Hale upon her death," I explained, looking at the investigators, "to be held in a sealed trust, accessible only by the chair of the audit committee. The instructions were simple, and they were legally binding." I turned my gaze from the investigators and, for the first time since this began, I looked directly at my father. I wanted him to see this. I wanted him to hear her words. The letter's instructions were as follows. "If my daughter, Ava Drake, is ever harmed by Thomas or any person acting as his agent or spouse, the attached documents are to be released to her and to the board immediately." I let the words sink in. If Ava is ever harmed, the contingency, the ghost in the machine my mother had built, a dead man's switch triggered by a slap at 7:12 a.m. My father's face, already pale, turned the color of ash. The wrinkles around his eyes seemed to deepen, to fracture, as if the structure of his face was collapsing from within. He was not just seeing the ghost of his dead wife. He was understanding, in this final devastating moment, that she had seen this coming. She had known what he was, what he would allow, and she had planned for it. "The triggering event," I said, my voice cold as ice, "was the assault that occurred this morning, which has been documented. The letter was unsealed by Ms. Morales at 8:45 a.m. today. Ben, please display File Exhibit E." Ben, the AV tech, who was now acting with the precision of a court officer, typed a command. The screen behind me, which had been dark, now showed a scanned letter, written in my mother's elegant, familiar script. "But it wasn't the letter itself that was the primary document," I said. "It was the attachment." The image on the screen changed. It was no longer a letter. It was a dense, legal document from the company's own archives, a stock option agreement. "My mother was a founding partner of this company," I said, my voice resonating with a new kind of power. Her contributions were not just cultural, they were financial. Upon her death, her vested shares and preferred options did not, as my father believed, revert to him or to the estate. My father was shaking his head, a slow, dazed denial. "No, no, the will. I was the executor." "You were the executor of her personal estate," I corrected him. "You were not the executor of her primary investment vehicle, per the instructions she filed with the board years before her death. Her entire block of founders' stock options, a block that had been quietly appreciating for 2 decades, was transferred, upon her passing, not to a person, but to a trust." I pointed to the screen. The Elizabeth Drake Protectorate Trust, a trust with a single, legally mandated purpose, to act as a fiduciary safeguard for the ethical integrity of Cedar Line Foods. I took a breath, and the sole, designated trustee of that fund, with full voting power over all its shares, is me. The final piece, not inheritance, power, not a grieving daughter, a trustee. "What? What is the holding?" Robert Harrison's voice asked from the speaker. Sharp, urgent. "As of the market's close yesterday," I said, "the trust, which I have had the power to activate at my discretion since my 25th birthday, controls 17% of the voting shares of this company. 17%. It was a number that changed everything. It was a controlling interest. It was larger than any single institutional investor. It was larger than my father's own personal stake. My father looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the ultimate defeat. He had not just been outmaneuvered by me, he had been checkmated, years ago, by a woman whose intelligence he had fatally underestimated. He had thought her legacy was in the framed photos he had taken down. He was wrong. Her legacy was a weapon, and she had placed it in my hand. I did not hold his gaze. I had nothing more to say to him. His judgment was irrelevant. I turned my back on him. I looked at the 200 employees still standing in the room. I looked at Maria Flores. I looked at the young analyst. I looked at Leo. They were the company. They were the ones who mattered. Therefore, I said, my voice ringing with the formal authority of the company's largest single shareholder, as the acting trustee of the Elizabeth Drake Protectorate Trust, I am exercising my fiduciary duty. I am formally putting a resolution to this assembly, to be ratified by the board, effective immediately. I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. Resolution 1. That Celia Vance Drake be suspended, indefinitely and without pay, from her position as Chief People Officer and from all duties and responsibilities at this company, pending the full results of the independent investigation. Resolution 2. That an interim, independent Chief People Officer, selected by our external counsel and approved by the Audit Committee, be appointed by the end of this week to oversee a complete, transparent overhaul of our human resources and compliance procedures. The room was absolutely still. This was it, the coup de grace. Robert Harrison's voice came instantly. The Audit Committee supports the resolution. Jenna Morales' voice followed. The proposed resolutions are fully compliant with the corporate bylaws and the authority of the trust. Then we will vote, I said. All employees at the rank of director and above, as stipulated in the charter for an emergency shareholder action, please raise your identification cards if you're in favor of the resolutions. It was not a wave, it was an explosion. A forest of hands shot into the air, holding up their white and blue ID cards. Maria Flores, who was not a director, stood with tears streaming down her face, but all around her, the directors, the VPs, the people who had lived in fear or complicity, voted yes, one after another, a sea of them. It was unanimous. The resolutions pass, I said. The doors at the back of the room hissed open again. This time it wasn't investigators. It was 2 members of corporate security, the real ones, their faces grim. They walked not to me, but to Celia. One of them, a tall woman with gray hair, spoke to Celia in a low voice I couldn't hear, but I knew what she was saying. Celia didn't move. She was a statue. The investigator, Miles, gently touched her arm. "Ma'am," he said, not unkindly, "it's time." Leo, the guard from our floor, walked over. He stood in front of Celia, his hand held out, palm up. He didn't say a word. He just waited. Slowly, as if moving underwater, Celia unclipped the ID card from the lapel of her Chanel jacket. Her name, her title, her power. She held it for a second. Then her hand dropped, and the plastic card fell into Leo's waiting palm. Leo looked at the card. Then he looked at me. He walked over to my podium, his face impassive. He held out the card. I took it from him. It was still warm from her body. I did not look at it. I did not keep it. I did not throw it away. I simply turned it over, face down, and placed it on the polished surface of the podium, a small, useless piece of plastic. The transaction was complete. Her career was over. Celia was gone. She didn't make a scene. She simply went, a ghost in a Chanel jacket, escorted by the quiet, purposeful security guards. The heavy glass doors hissed shut behind her, the sound definitive, like the closing of a tomb. The investigators remained, observing, their work just beginning. My father was still leaning against the far glass wall, a solitary figure adrift in the wreckage. He was staring at the empty space where Celia had stood, his face a ruin. The room was still standing. The 200 employees had become a silent congregation, witnesses to the fall. They were waiting. They didn't know for what, but they knew the old order had been broken. and they were waiting to see what would rise in its place. I looked past them all, to the back of the room. The single red recording light on the main camera was still glowing, a patient, unblinking eye. It was the only thing in the universe that mattered now. The record was not yet complete. I walked back to my podium. My footsteps were the only sound. I felt the weight of every eye in the room on me, but I didn't look at them. I looked at the lens. I was no longer speaking to the room. I was speaking to the company. I was speaking to the future. I was speaking to the archive. I leaned into the microphone. "This is not a scandal," I said. My voice was low, but the microphone carried it, filling every corner of the silent room. Scandals are messy. They are emotional. They are about human failing. I paused, letting the words settle. "This is an inventory." The word was cold, clean, precise, the word of an accountant. "It is a full accounting of assets and liabilities. The liabilities are clear: harm, inflicted and ignored, unpaid hours, systematically stolen, a culture of silence, meticulously enforced. These are the debts that have been accrued in the dark, under the banner of family." I raised my left hand and slowly, deliberately, pushed back the cuff of my silk blouse. There, on the pale skin of my inner wrist, was a faint, yellowish-purple bruise, old and faded, but still visible under the harsh lights. It was from 2 months ago, when Celia had grabbed me in the hallway, her fingers digging into my arm to stop me from walking away from one of her discussions. It was file D003. I held my wrist up for the camera to see. The tight follow cam zoomed in, capturing the faint discoloration. "These policies," I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "The ones we write in these glass towers, the ones we print on glossy paper, they are only as real as the homes that write them. They are only as strong as the character of the people who sign them. When the hand that signs the zero-tolerance policy is the same hand that leaves a mark, the policy is worthless. It is a lie, and every employee in this company knows it." I let my sleeve fall back into place, covering the evidence. I looked up from the camera, and for the first time, I scanned the faces of the audience. Ben, at the AV desk, understood. The main camera stayed on me, but the broadcast feed on the internal monitors switched to a slow panning shot of the crowd. I saw it, the release, the validation. Maria Flores was no longer crying. She was nodding, a slow, determined up-and-down motion, her jaw set. The young analyst from finance was standing straighter, the terror in his eyes replaced by a dawning, fragile sense of hope. Leo, the guard, stood by the door, his arms unfolded, his expression one of grim, profound relief. In the front row, a vice president of marketing, a woman who I knew had been a target of Celia's cruelty for years, was openly weeping, not in sadness, but in catharsis. They were not just watching a C-suite drama, they were watching their own unspoken truths being brought into the light. They were seeing their own resolved issues finally acknowledged. I turned back to the lens. The red light was my anchor. Today, that lie ends. My voice was hard again, final. Today, we take inventory, and then we clear the debt, effective immediately. I leaned in closer to the microphone, my voice dropping but gaining an intensity that made the air crackle. The era of "park this" is over. The phrase, her phrase, echoed in the room one last time, not as a secret command, but as an epitaph. As if on cue, Jenna Morales' voice, crisp and formal, came through the room's speakers, a legal seal on the proceedings. "For the official record," she announced, "pursuant to state and federal statutes, the Board and the Special Review Committee formally acknowledge the protected whistleblower status of the following individuals: Ava Drake, Maria Flores, Leo Valdez, and," she paused, "and the employee from the finance department who came forward. Your names are now under a legal protective order. Any attempt at retaliation against you or your employment is a federal offense." The young analyst flinched, then stood a little taller, a shield of law having just descended around him. I looked at my father. He had been watching me, his face a canvas of disbelief and dawning horror. But when Jenna Morales read out the names, when the final legal consequences became undeniable, something inside him broke. He did not rage. He did not speak. He simply lowered his eyes. He broke his gaze with me and stared down at the polished, reflective floor, as if seeing his own distorted image for the first time. The fight was gone. The bluster was gone. The CEO was gone. He was just a man who had looked away one too many times, and now there was nothing left to see. It was the first time in my entire life I had seen him without a single word to say. My work here was done. The case was made. The record was set. I reached for the small remote on my podium. My thumb hovered over the button that controlled the presentation screen. I looked one last time at the unblinking red light of the camera. Then I pressed the button. Click. The screen behind me, which had been the backdrop for the entire drama, instantly went black. The sudden absence of light was a physical shock, plunging the front of the room into shadow. The meeting was over. Silence rushed back in to fill the void, but it was different now. The thick, suffocating silence of fear was gone. The pressurized silence of shock had dissipated. This was a new silence. It was clean. It was the quiet after a storm has passed, leaving the air washed and pure. It was the silence of held breaths being released. It was the silence of an ending, yes, but also of a beginning. It was the kind of silence that heals. I unclipped the small, black lavalier microphone from my blouse. I coiled its thin wire neatly and placed it on the podium, next to Celia's discarded ID card. My presentation was over. I turned my back on the podium, on the dark screen, and on the faint, ghostly reflection of the Cedarline Foods logo on the glass wall behind me. I walked. As I approached the center aisle, the security detail was leading Celia toward the exit. She walked between them, her head held high in a final, futile performance of dignity, but her steps were stiff, robotic. The sharp, expensive click-clack of her stiletto heels on the polished floor was the only sound in the room. It was a stark, lonely rhythm, a metronome counting out the seconds of her defeat. Click, clack, each step another $1 million lost. Click, clack, each step another year of her life evaporating. I did not watch her go. From the corner of the room, by the glass wall, a voice called out, hoarse and broken. Ava. It was my father. It was not a command. It was a plea. I did not stop. I did not turn. I did not slow my pace. I kept walking, my eyes fixed on the doors at the end of the aisle. That name, in his voice, in this room, no longer had any power over me. It belonged to a different person, a different lifetime. As I walked, the sea of employees, who had been standing frozen, shifted. They did not applaud. That would have been too simple, too corporate. Instead, they parted. They created a silent human path for me, a corridor of respect through the wreckage. They stepped back, their faces a mixture of awe, relief, and a fierce, quiet gratitude. As I passed a row of marketing managers, a woman, the one who had been crying, reached out, not to touch me, but just to break the space between us. She whispered a single, profound phrase, "Thank you." It was all I needed to hear. I reached the end of the aisle. The heavy glass doors slid open before me, Leo holding them from the outside. I stepped out of the apex room and into the cool, quiet neutrality of the executive floor's elevator bay. The doors hissed shut behind me, sealing off the scene. The muffled silence of the aftermath was absolute. A draft from the building's powerful HVAC system curled around the corner, a tendril of cold air that touched the back of my neck, the same spot where the skin had once been hot and stinging from her hand. I pressed the call button. The polished steel doors of the elevator slid open instantly, an empty car waiting for me. I stepped inside. The doors began to close, a final curtain of brushed metal. In the last sliver of a view, I saw my father, a small, slumped figure in a vast glass room, finally and completely alone. The doors sealed with a soft thump. The sterile, white light of the elevator cab was bright, clinical. I was alone. Ding. The car began its smooth, silent descent. 34 floors to the ground. My phone, in my jacket pocket, vibrated once. I pulled it out. It was a new email. Delivered to my secure, private account. The sender was Robert Harrison, chair of the audit committee. The subject was a single word: enacted. The body of the email was just as brief, a piece of cold, legal finality. All protective measures for WB 2025-09482 are in place. Your security detail is waiting in the lobby. We are in control. Thank you. I closed the email. I then opened my corporate email client one last time. My access hadn't been frozen. As the whistleblower, my communication lines were protected. I composed a new message. To all employees global. Subject, no subject. I typed 3 words. 3 words to close the ledger. 3 words to signal the end of the war and the beginning of the long, difficult peace. We're done here. I hit send. The elevator continued its descent. Floor 10, floor 5, floor 2. It slowed, and a soft, final ding echoed in the small space. The doors slid open, and the bright, unfiltered, glorious light of the late afternoon flooded in, chasing all the shadows away. Cut to black. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me. I'm so curious to know where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know where you're listening. Let's connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel, giving this video a like, and if you really want to show your support, hitting that hype button. It helps more than you know and ensures these stories get heard by as many people as possible.